While Ford and GM were busy announcing the end of the combustion engine, a company most Americans have never bought a car from actually did it. And now, it's the most valuable automaker on the planet. Here's what we're investigating. Did American automakers actually promise to go electric? They did. Publicly, specifically, with dollar amounts attached. So who's winning the EV race if they backed out? Not Tesla, not Ford. A foreign automaker most Americans couldn't name. And what does that mean for the V8? Its real competition was never the EPA. It was never CAFE fines. It's this company. Before tracking who actually delivered on the EV revolution, it's worth reviewing exactly what was promised. In 2021, General Motors announced it would launch 30 new electric vehicles by 2025 and eliminate tailpipe emissions from its entire lineup by 2035. 30 vehicles, 14 years. A number that specific doesn't come from a company that's still figuring it out. Ford was equally specific. The company pledged $50 billion toward electrification and committed to making 40% of its global sales electric by 2030. Mercedes-Benz announced it would go all electric by 2030 in markets where the infrastructure allowed. Multiple brands signed the Accelerating to Zero Coalition pledge, publicly committing to 100% zero-emission vehicle sales by 2035. These were not vague aspirational statements buried in a sustainable footnote. They were headline announcements delivered at shareholder meetings and auto shows, complete with concept cars and countdown timers. What happened next is the part the press releases didn't cover. But before getting there, it's worth understanding exactly how much money it cost to make those promises. A write-down is what a company does when it admits, on a financial document, that something it paid for is no longer worth what it paid. It's the accounting equivalent of a receipt for a mistake. Ford took a $19.5 billion write-down tied to its EV operations. Ford's EV division, called Model E, was losing approximately $130,000 on every electric vehicle it sold in early 2024. Not $1,300, not $13,000, $130,000 per vehicle. Ford was essentially running a program where it paid customers more than the sticker price to take a car off the lot, and then recording the gap as a loss. GM wrote off $1.6 billion in EV-related assets and quietly shelved several of the 30 vehicles it had announced with such precision. Mercedes-Benz reported a 25% year-over-year drop in EV sales in Q2 2024 and abandoned the development of its all-electric platform. The Accelerating to Zero pledge, the public coalition commitment to 100% EV sales by 2035, was not so much broken as quietly deprioritized, which is the corporate term for broken. GM pivoted toward hybrids. Ford cut its electric pickup production targets. Mercedes extended its combustion timeline indefinitely. Every company that had announced the end of the gas engine found a professional way to unannounce it without using the word retreat. The total financial damage across Ford, GM, and Mercedes alone runs into the tens of billions of dollars, spent on a transformation that did not happen on schedule from companies that said it was already decided. While that money was being written off, a company on the other side of the world was posting profits. While Ford was losing $130,000 per EV sold and GM was writing off assets, one automaker announced in 2022 that it was phasing out internal combustion engines entirely, and then actually did it. BYD is a Chinese automaker that most Americans have never purchased a vehicle from. In 2022, the company announced it would stop producing purely combustion-powered vehicles. That announcement was not walked back. It was not quietly deprioritized. BYD followed through, and by 2023, the company was producing and selling only battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. No more combustion lineup. The thing Ford and GM announced and then reversed, BYD executed. In 1 year, BYD delivered 4.27 million EVs and plug-in hybrids. For context, the entire United States produced roughly 1.5 million electric vehicles in 2023. It is a scaled manufacturer operating at a volume that the American industry has not matched in the electric segment. In 2024, China as a whole produced over 5 times the EVs manufactured by the European Union and 11 times the number produced by the United States. BYD is the largest single driver of that output. The company is now the most valuable automaker on the planet by market capitalization, a title that used to belong to a company headquartered in Detroit. The company that made the promise and kept it is the one American consumers have largely never considered. And it is winning the market that Detroit spent a decade saying it would dominate. It is not staying in China. BYD's competitive advantage is not just that it outsells Detroit in EVs, it's where it's building next. BYD is actively constructing manufacturing facilities in Mexico and Brazil, a factory in the Mexican state of Nuevo León, a short distance from the U.S. border, represents BYD's move into the North American supply chain geography. Brazil's factory, currently under construction, is designed to serve the broader South American market. Meanwhile, multiple American automakers announced plant closures and production cuts tied directly to EV underperformance. The pivot back toward combustion and hybrids is now costing more money in retooling. American auto workers experienced both rounds of that math within the same 3-year window. The company's profitability in the EV segment, while Ford was losing $130,000 per vehicle, provided the cash to fund the geographic expansion. Detroit lost money proving EVs were hard to build profitably. BYD made money doing it anyway, and used that money to build closer. That gap in profitability, in volume, in geographic positioning is the actual competitive picture. And the supply chain explanation behind it is the part that makes the Ford loss number look even worse than it already does. Nobody planned to talk about this part. Ford's EV division lost approximately $1.3 billion in a single quarter. In that same period, BYD posted a profit, not a small one. BYD's net income has been growing while it scales. It skipped the loss phase. It built scale and profit at the same time. The reason BYD can do this is vertical integration. The company manufactures its own batteries, the single most expensive component in any electric vehicle, through a subsidiary called FinDreams Battery, which also sells to other manufacturers. When Ford buys battery cells, that cost goes to a supplier. When BYD builds a battery, that cost stays inside the company. The margin difference between those two supply chains is the difference between losing $130,000 per vehicle and making money on every one. American automakers buy their batteries. BYD makes theirs. That one structural difference explains more of the competitive gap than any number of press releases about commitment to electrification. Ford announced the future. BYD built the supply chain for it. The company that was supposed to lose money figuring out EVs while Detroit perfected them turned out to be profitable before Detroit got started. It's a manufacturing and supply chain advantage that took years to build, and it was being built while American automakers were busy scheduling the press conferences. Here's the verdict. The combustion engine's real killer is not the EPA. It's not CAFE fines. It's not an American regulator with a deadline. The company actually killing combustion, systematically, profitably, at scale, is the one that most of the American markets has never bought from. Ford spent $19.5 billion finding out that marketing and selling EVs profitably is harder than announcing it. GM wrote off $1.6 billion learning the same lesson. BYD spent that time becoming the world's largest EV manufacturer, posting profits, and breaking ground on factories near the U.S. border. Detroit said combustion was over. Then Detroit went back to combustion because the math didn't work. Meanwhile, the company that eliminated combustion from its own lineup in 2022 and stuck to it now commands roughly 62% of the global EV market. 62%! The V8 comeback story. Ram bringing back the Hemi. GM converting a billion-dollar EV plant back to V8 production. Feels like a win for American truck culture. But the win is happening in a domestic market that a better capitalized, vertically integrated foreign competitor is now physically positioning itself to enter. The company killing the V8 isn't Dodge. It isn't the government. It isn't the one that made the promise everyone else broke and kept it. The EV tax credit that helped make American-built electric vehicles price competitive has been eliminated. For Detroit, that removes one of the few tools it had to close the cost gap with foreign competitors. For BYD, which was already ineligible for those credits and was building profitably without them, nothing happens next. It doesn't favor the side that needed more time. If you haven't seen why the V8 is dying in the first place, go and watch that video first. It sets up everything I just showed you. Drop a comment. Would you buy a BYD if it was built in North America and priced like a Ram?